most people, we've known Mike because he's been at many of these meetings here, so he probably doesn't need too much of an introduction here, but he's going to talk about the data science efforts at, and I'm not going to try and pronounce it, so NIEHS, because I'm sure everybody pronounces that acronym differently, but talking about what's going on in the Office of Data Science there, and what the priorities are in the office and where they're going. So I'll turn it over to Mike to tell us all about
it. Hey guys, and some of this I'm not going to like talk about a particular product or development effort because it's a strange world. But I sort of jumped over the fence, and we're now in a position to sort of eat our own dog food, if you will. So I remember there was some discussion during the last meeting about, I think this was with Renee, talking about, are we producers or consumers? And I was mentioning the fact that we're now straddling that line. And I sort of want to talk about what we're doing and sort of why we think the hubs are important and what we are looking to both get from and contribute to the effort in the context of the hubs. So with that, so I'm now working at NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the NIH, larger NIH organization. We're based here in RTP. We have a beautiful campus that I contend is actually the model for Hawkins Lab and Stranger Things. If you guys don't know, the Stranger Things people were and went to Jordan High School. So if you see a picture of the lab and compare it to Hawkins Lab, you tell me. Okay. So, but previously I was working with Dr. Moore and Dr. Raja Sekar in the DICE Center, and then with the DataNet Federation Consortium, where I know a lot of you folks from. And I became involved with the BD Hubs effort when I was at RENCI, and that's really continued as I've moved over to NIEHS. And so it's interesting for me, and I'm still navigating, coming from the NSF side of things and now working in the NIH side of things, and how much things are actually flowing back and forth between those boundaries, as well as the boundaries between what we do with vendors and so forth. So this is really an interesting area to be in. So we're going to talk about a little bit of what we're doing with ODS and what the NIEHS Commons is. And again, why BD Hubs efforts are important to us, and about contributing back to this community. So this is from our mission statement: accelerate scientific discovery, collaborative research, and improve public health through the application of scientific data and knowledge. So with the wonderful presentation we just saw, just remove the words hydrology and insert public health. And I know there's even public health overlaps with the hydrologic community. And you'll see that we are actually all working on the same problems when you step back and look at it from the sort of multidisciplinary level. And that, again, is where we were 5 years ago with the data nets, was multidisciplinary research. So, for example, the controversies with GenX and the water here in North Carolina, that's a hydrological problem as well as a public health problem. So you can see definitely how these overlap. So this is really at the very highest level what we're concerned about. So with toxicology and the things we do at NIEHS, we're worried a lot about life science and genomics, and how the environment impacts the genome and the health effects of environmental exposures. So we're dealing internally with a lot of high throughput technologies that are creating science data and then applying computation to those data sets to derive data, and then also to begin to preserve and distribute and share that information with the focus on FAIR. And I'm sure FAIR has popped up more than once in a lot of these conversations, but FAIR is sort of our focus now. So data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is in the context of what's going on. And I know there's lots of folks wearing this hat on the call as well too, where NIH at large is really looking at these problems of big science and how the cloud impacts it, and how we manage health science data, share it securely, compute on it securely, control it, make it findable and discoverable. So we, in our group, are very much tracking not only what's going on in the BD Hubs group, but also what's going on with these larger efforts. And we're tracking it in terms of, orienting our own efforts internally as we deal with internal data with an eye towards this opening up into this sort of shared fair-based environment, bringing in large data sets, high throughput, next generation sequencing, all these sorts of technologies, managing that data, managing it in terms of compute, creating data sets that are preserved, findable with authenticity, provenance, and all the Regan Moore things that I could channel for you guys. So it's really a nice place to be. As I'll say, we're starting internally. What we're dealing with a lot now are the internal data sets coming out of our core labs. So cryo-EM, mass spectrometry. We have studies where, we have then tissue samples or different things are being sent out by the PIs to different core labs where different sorts of assays are done. All that data is returned to the PIs and integrated and analyzed to create studies on, for example, the cancer effects of a certain chemical, or they're doing studies on all kinds of environmental exposures. So it is not just FASTQ files that we are concerned with. It's this larger idea of an information commons and a knowledge network, taking in all these different aspects of health science and bringing them together, with the point being to increase the speed to which we can find new knowledge. So you have this larger picture that we are all driving towards in our own domains, but it's always towards, right? And so we're perpetually towards, but we're starting with some more prosaic concerns. I borrowed this from Regan, but this is this idea that data has a life cycle. And in a lot of these projects, we're more concerned with the right two boxes, if you will, of this data life cycle. So as we even look at the NIH Commons effort, it is really oriented towards these right two boxes. So we're an organization right now that is internally way over on the left-hand side, which is managing data coming off of our core labs, managing researchers, trying to assemble different kinds of assays, different sorts of data sets to create publications, to drive conclusions. And so all that is occurring on this left-hand side of the chart. And even just dealing with those first 3 or 4 boxes, our work is cut out for us. So, so again, where we are is more on this left-hand side. We're very much concerned now with internal facing data with an eye towards what's going to happen. And I would actually sort of submit that a lot of the entities that are involved with projects like the BD Hub are actually in reality living in that side of the space. But what we're concerned about is, how do we manage this data over on the left-hand side so that it can transition over to that right-hand side as fair data, where we've kept provenance, where we know where the data came from. We can make assertions about its authenticity. We can also have the repeatability to validate a study, or if questions come up, we could, since this data is also very expensive to acquire, how can we reuse this data? So those sorts of things. So our architecture right now, internally, we're really dealing with repositories for this core data and managing the delivery of this core data to our researchers. Previously, what you have, and we've seen this in a lot of places, is you have DDNs and NetApps and so forth that are just chock full of terabytes of sequence files and other sorts of data sets. And we begin to lose value in that data because people can't really describe where that data really came from. The metadata is not complete. So we're dealing with immediately getting our handle on these sorts of things. So we have, as with HydroShare, a grid that is based on iRods. We do have an eye towards federation mechanisms as being an important way that we can extend the commons out in various directions, both towards external collaborators or potentially other parts of NIH, but also, interestingly, how we can use this sort of architecture to place resources inside of different labs who maybe are sitting inside a science VLAN doing work, but be able to draw data from these sort of distributed nodes into a central core to do computation, processing, replication, and so forth. So sort of data tiering in a sort of a different way, with the labs being the first part of the tier. And then we are very much interested in CWL and getting to some common processes for describing workflows and processes. So like most people, Docker and Singularity, the ability to run workflows on one platform and move over to a larger, more capable platform. So as we move from things like MISeq to NextSeq into bigger, scarier things like NovaSeq, and needing to avail ourselves of more computational power, that's where this sort of agility in our workflows and pipelines comes from. And in that, using the ability to interrogate workflows and Singularity containers and so forth to capture parameters, ensure reproducibility, establish provenance chain custody. Similarly, we're very concerned with starting to develop and utilize all of the different ontologies and taxonomies that are out there. So we're in the process of evaluating and adopting tools to manage our ontologies and taxonomies, and are actually currently wrestling with the kinds of data we can extract from the workflows and how we integrate human curation into this, both to start describing the experimental methods that are being used, the questions that are being asked, the outcomes that result from data, and link them to publications. None of this, again, should be surprising to anybody. But again, within the BD Hub's context, what we're really interested in is kind of future-proofing, and we look at the BD Hubs and even things like we are very interested in GA4GH and other groups in terms of future-proofing and sort of confirming the architectural choices we are making now internally, so that as we begin to open up to the world, we're in a place where we don't have to redo everything, if this makes sense. And I think a lot of people are in the same place we are. This is just to show, not necessarily to be able to read this chart, but this is just to show where we are. Is we have all of these basic elements either in place or in pilot, but we're choosing among technologies, internal identifiers. Are we looking at MinIDs? How are we archiving data? So things like BD-bag, is that appropriate to us? Again, choosing ontologies, metadata, how we describe our data, and then processing pipelines from all of these different data sources. Our concern right now is our epigenomics core and all of the various sequencers that we run. And again, adding then things like cryo-EM, mass spec, and other kinds of ways of analyzing data. Delivering them to PIs and ensure long-term fair access. So in terms of BD Hubs, I looked at the rings and the spokes, and I think our concerns, it's like Maslow's hierarchy. Our concerns are the ring concerns. Where are the highway signs and where are the guardrails? For us, here are some of the things that we as an organization are looking at. So very much the NIH Commons, what's going on with the BD Hubs and what we learned from the data nets, since that's where I came from. We're looking at peer institutions. So we're looking at what the hydrological community is doing. We're also looking at what NCI is doing with their cancer data commons, the NCI commons. And also what vendors are doing and saying. Although I think this group and the concerns this group are expressing are way ahead of where the vendors are. I had a major, if you talk to vendors sometimes and they won't know what FAIR is. Even people who are dealing in, things like storage technology and stuff, FAIR is not something that really has penetrated a lot in the vendor community. So I really do think the people that know about this and the real conversations are happening in the context of what the hubs are doing. Guardrails, and this is the other thing, the other ring of what the hubs are doing is looking at things like security and compliance. We're very concerned with data usage agreements. And again, one of the reasons we're internal facing right now is, boy, when you start opening things up to external collaboration, that's like going from 2 kids to 3 kids or something like that. It's not at a linear progression of complexity. Yeah. And And that's kind of where I left things. Again, I didn't want to get too much into nuts and bolts, but we have been really interested in the various presentations of the various technologies. And again, sitting on the other side of the fence, we, you know, as part of NIEHS, we are not in the business of creating products, but we are in the business of being parts of communities and utilizing projects at a level of maturity and bringing them together to create coherent systems that can deliver this sort of fair or fair plus, as we kind of focus on fair plus computable. Because I think the tools we need mostly exist in the open source community, in the kinds of things that NSF has produced, in the kinds of things that NIH is producing in their commons efforts, and how the BD Hub can be a resource for us in terms of sort of navigating this. And I will sort of stop there. We could go into mind-numbing detail, and I know we all love to, but I was trying to keep it more towards, I guess, my reaction to some of the conversations I've heard recently about the hubs and their role. And I will stop sharing there and then pass it back.
Thank you very much. So before I dive into any questions, I'll open it up to other people here.
I have a quick question. It's Florence. So you've had privacy and trustworthiness and things like that on there. Are data ethics or the ethics regarding the use of data a separate topic, or kind of a combination of a few of those things on your last page?
They are not a separate topic at all. The reason I don't have them on there is because it's sort of not my expertise area, but I do know, for example, if you look at the NIH Data Commons efforts, that there are whole sections, whole key concerns of the NIH Commons efforts on things like ethics, privacy, the science drivers and scientific use cases for this data. So it had more to do with the fact that that's not an area I could cover very well.
Okay, because FAIR might have an E at the end, ethical. F-A-I-R-E, very interesting. Thank you very much. That was a great overview.
This is Matthew from UC Davis. I have a question for you.
Sure.
I was interested to hear that you are thinking about, ontology and vocabulary management tools. And can you talk a little bit about that and what that means and how you interact with other ontology communities like OBO or whether you're the right person to talk to about that?
Well, actually, if I could, and Rasham, I don't know if you have your microphone available, but I would invite Rasham to maybe comment, because she's part of the Office of Data Science as well and is sort of leading the effort at ontologies, or Stephanie if she's on, and perhaps they'd like to comment.
So I can briefly say that we are looking at several biomedical ontologies and identifying which ones can serve our needs. So that's one aspect that we are looking at. And then the other aspect is how to manage these ontologies. So we are looking at several different tools and in the process of evaluating them. And maybe Stephanie can add further on that.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm also obviously with the Office of Data Science. And the area of environmental health sciences controlled vocabulary has had a lot of fits and starts, as you can probably imagine, given the multidisciplinary nature of the topic. So we pretty much encompass, or can potentially encompass, just about almost every discipline that is out there in one respect or another. And there are currently efforts underway to re-energize a multi-institute approach along with EPA and others within the environmental health science community to try to come up with an approach for developing an environmental health science vocabulary. There
Right.
are definitely ontologies that already exist in the biomedical space that we obviously would not, that we would be able to incorporate and not try to reinvent the wheel on. And it's understanding where there might be gaps in vocabulary. So for example, maybe perhaps related to exposure, that we would want to work on developing. And obviously our use case for exposure may have some areas of difference than how EPA might need to implement that. But it is definitely a hot topic area. I am now calling this the year of controlled vocabulary in our space, because we have been trying to bring it up, gosh, over the past, I think it's been at least 10, 12 years that we have tried to get our institute to begin thinking about controlled vocabulary. And it has now become apparent just within our institute that we have a lot of data systems and applications where people have continued to reinvent metadata or some type of a controlled vocabulary to help with coding of their content. And we have situations where one group calls it organism, another group species, and we need to rectify that type of situation. So yes, a lot of effort underway.
Thanks very much.
All right. I just had one quick question because I sort of greedy to ask it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So a lot of what I keep seeing in NIH and other spaces for a lot of this work, they keep talking about cloud. You talked about cloud and vendors and things. What do you feel sort of the NIH's view on what a cloud is? Because it's one of those questions, everybody's got an opinion, but nobody seems to be the same.
I'll make a technical answer, and then I will definitely deflect policy answers and so forth to Steph.
I'm not thinking policy answers. I'm thinking, what are they looking for when they say the word cloud?
And to me, there's no such thing. That I think that really what we deal with more are about sort of agility in terms of where data is stored. So even internally, it can be as prosaic as we've got data on this NetApp and we've got data on a DDM. How do we treat that under a common view? And that's our interest in iRods.
Right.
And we could have data in some occasion where it's on a DDN, and then you have a replica, or you push stuff out to Amazon or out to Glacier or something like that. So is that cloud? What? So I think cloud is a meaningless term. I think more what's important is data has independence of location.
Right.
And data has an identifier that persists no matter where that location is. And then it's really more about this portability of execution of analyses. And so I know the NIH Commons, a lot of the effort is really more oriented towards minimizing data egress charges by moving computational units to where big data sets sit.
Right.
And that is just, that's the same problem we have if we want to process data locally or process it on some high capacity resources within NIEHS, or send stuff to BioWolf or something like that. So I think cloud is misleading. I think it's the standards and open APIs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that was sort of what I was going for, because I like to pick on that word. So, but I thought, I think it's one of those things that is good to sort of talk about, especially in this hub environment, because at some level we are the cloud, and that's the important thing to sort of remember on that.
That's correct. Oh, please, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Mike. It's great to have you back, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think that's what's important is that we would like to build systems that are not wall gardens, that we can have other people consider to be a cloud, even if it's sitting on just a 2-up Linux rack server in our computer room, we can still say it's cloud in terms of how you perceive it, right?
Right.
And,
I was going to offer up a definition for cloud. Would this work for people? And this would be from an agency perspective. We are not buying you new machines. It seems more and more it comes down to that. Put it somewhere that already exists in another place that's virtualized.
Or an as-a-service model, right?
Right.
That's, we're not going to be isolated to being our own island. So, all right, well.